Hello and welcome back to Ambitious. I, first of all, want to say that if you are someone who is coming back to today's episode from last week, I want to welcome you back and thank you for joining me for another week and tuning in. And also, if you are somebody new and this is your first episode listening, maybe a friend sent this to you or you discovered us on the internet, on Spotify, I also want to say a warm welcome and thank you for listening. And we're excited to have you join us in this ambitious family. I really am pumped about today's topic because one of the things that as an entrepreneur I feel like is the kind of like unspoken thing is that entrepreneurship is the most intense personal development journey you're ever going to go on. If you are an entrepreneur, you are bracing for impact. And when I mean impact, change in the individual that you are and the way that you operate in your life and business is constantly in development. And if you are somebody who wants to succeed as an entrepreneur, and frankly, in any bucket of your life, whether it's with fitness, it could be your mental health, it could be in relationships, in literally any area or category, you're going to have a goal. And what does the goal require us to do? It actually requires us to change, right? All of us desire and we have this constant pull toward becoming something better, sometimes becoming something different. But the question becomes like, how do we do that, right? All of us are on this constant quest to develop ourselves and to be able to shift into something else. But how do we actually do that? And so in previous episodes, which we also if you scroll back have done very recently, we've done episodes about, goal setting and how to do an effective goal setting, how to really decide what your vision is for what it is that you want to change. But today we're going to talk about the actual stages of change that occur and how to really identify which bucket you might be in. And I'm also going to overlap this with a model that I learned this year that was really helpful for me in helping me to understand why I wasn't changing. And it helped me to just learn so much more about myself and frankly to know what to do to help to get progress because I just as much as the next person set goals sometimes on things and I don't achieve them or I don't make progress on them or I feel like I stay stuck in them. And it gets really frustrating. At least I felt frustrated. I felt like there's times where I've set a goal and I struggle and I'm kind of just constantly in this rumination or circle around it versus actually making movement. And in understanding the stages, there's two models we're going to go through today. The stages of change model, but also the levels of competence model. And these two models, I'm going to make them super easy and digestible for you. And I'm also going to tell you a story of how I specifically went through these so you can kind of have a tactical visual of what these might look like for you. And these are important because they go through the process of understanding how we change, but also the process of our own perspective in the way we're changing. So, how is our own awareness shifting at each of those stages of change as well? So, without getting too much into the models themselves, I want to get kind of into the steps and break this down to make it super simple and digestible. So, when we're looking at change, the thing that we have to recognize and kind of address the elephant in the room, if you will, is the fact that not all of us are ready to change. I myself have had many times where I was in a place where I didn't necessarily know that I even wanted to make a change about it yet. I didn't even know I had a problem. I didn't realize that I had any issue happening. And this is considered pre-contemplation in the stages of change. And this is also considered what is labeled as unconscious incompetence. And so, in unconscious incompetence, really what that means is we are not consciously aware that we are not good at something. We have no awareness. It's not like, me with skiing where I'm aware of the fact that I'm not great at it. We are not even at a place where we are aware that we're not good. And so this has happened in buckets in my life. I sometimes have been in patterns with my health that I really didn't have any awareness were all that bad. Or maybe I was in a relationship that I didn't really have the ability at that time to acknowledge that anything was wrong. And most importantly, in business, there was a time in my business when it was actually doing really well and scaling, and I didn't really even realize that I had an issue. And I want to kind of break this down for you because in stage one of pre contemplation, this is really where you're at a place where you are not thinking about change. You're not talking about change. You're not even aware you got a problem. And it's tough because some of you may even have, in certain situations or other buckets in your life, other people telling you have a problem. And you're like, no, I don't. I don't resonate with that. And that's because you might be at a stage where you don't even have an awareness of it yet. You're not even conscious. You don't have it in your conscious brain day to day that you have a problem. And so this stage in business was actually not that long ago. I had this happen probably about 9 months ago. And 9 months ago, I went to a conference and I was going to this conference like I did any other conference. And business was scaling, things were flowing and going, or so I thought. And when I went to this conference, I attended it the way I would any other. I was consuming strategies. I was, listening to the speakers. I was networking. And at the time, looking back on it now, at the time, my quote unquote normal, or what I had very much normalized, was, to be honest, a lot of hours in the business. I was working all the time. And I, didn't necessarily always respect the boundaries that I had set up for myself. It was constantly something that I was trying to kind of get a grasp on. I would find myself having moments of little experiences of burnout and feeling like frustrated with the business or feeling like I was, tired or exhausted. But I always chalked it up to be like good old scaling, right? Like it's just, hustle and that's just what it is. And I didn't know I had anything wrong. I'm going to be honest, at that time, my perspective was that I was someone who was like a hustling go-getter. I hate to use this term, but like boss babe individual. I didn't know I had a problem in the way I was running my business. I didn't see at that time that I really had an issue. And here's the thing, people in my life were like, Kate, you work too much. Kate, you're constantly on your phone. Kate, you're constantly distracted and you're go, go, go. You never sit down. I had people in my world who were telling me, and it was literally like it went in one ear and out the other. And to me, I didn't recognize I had an issue. So I was not consciously aware that I had a problem or didn't know that I didn't know there was an issue. And I was not at a place where I was looking to change. I was like, I got what I got going on here. I'm making multiple seven figures in my business. I've got an amazing team. I've got amazing marketing. Like, boop, boop, boop. We're just going along. And I was just leaving things as they were. And so I didn't know that anything was wrong. So this stage is pre-contemplation. Okay. So this is when you do not know that you need to change anything. You don't know you have a problem. And oftentimes, you're at a place where, again, unconscious incompetence, you're not even aware that you're not doing something well. It's not even on your radar. And you might be in a bucket in this right now. Is there something maybe that the people in your life have said to you? The people in your life have kind of brought up or brought to the surface for you that you're actively not acknowledging? Is there an opportunity for us to tune in to some of the reminders around us? And when was the last time that you evaluated what was going on in your world? And again, whether it's the health bucket, if it's the relationship bucket, if it's business bucket, when was the last time that you really checked in and said, "How we doing? How are we doing in this bucket? And is there something that I might need to bring to my awareness?" And again, we're not at a place here where we're saying, "Hey, you need to go change it and do A, B, C." We're just saying, can we maybe become aware of something? And this practice is going to help to bring us into stage 2. And stage 2 is labeled as contemplation. Contemplation is also going to coincide with conscious incompetence, okay? So, contemplation is when you're aware or you become aware of a problem and you're considering the possibility of change, okay? And at this point, you might be unsure of how to exactly even navigate what it would look like to change. So at this stage, you're open to the possibility of change, but you really don't have any plan, visual, or clarity as to what that would even look like yet. And this is also known as conscious incompetence. Okay. So conscious incompetence is basically where we become aware of our inability or incompetence around something. So, again, the word being conscious incompetence, meaning we become consciously aware of something that we are incompetent at. So, again, me, I might, in a non-business setting, I might go skiing and not realize I'm bad. And then I might have someone come up to me and they say, "Hey, you really shouldn't do that because when you do pizza down the hill the entire time, this is what it's doing for you." And so what just happened in that moment? I went from I do pizza down the hill and this is how I ski to I have someone come up to me and say, "Hey, what about this?" And now instantly, in a moment, I have become consciously incompetent. I've become aware, it's been brought to my consciousness that I am not good at something or that there's something that I might need to solve as a problem. This is what puts us in the contemplation bucket. So, remember I told you that in stage 1, I was working in the business and I was doing the hours that I was, and I was kind of having this reality that I'd always had. It's always been the way that I've kind of known and experienced business. And to me, it wasn't really a big problem. Well, 9 months ago, I went to an event, and you guys may have heard me talk about this story in other episodes. So if so, I apologize for the repeat, but it really is how I changed a lot of my life in the last 6 months. I went to an event, and at this event, I remember that I was asking a million and one questions, as I always do. And at this event, I asked a question, and I remember my now coach had come over to me and said, "Hey, can you put your hand down and stop asking questions? I'm gonna answer your questions after because you seem like you got a lot of questions." Which, hey guys, if I am around a lot of smart people, I'm gonna ask a lot of questions. That's one thing. Side note that I will give you little hack when you're around people that are really, really successful. And so I was like, "Yeah, sure." He's like, "Just don't ask questions. I'll talk to you afterwards. I'll answer any questions you have." I'm like, "Perfect." And so afterwards we talk and I said, "Yeah, I'm just really looking at what the next thing is for me for scaling. Things are going really great. We're doing multiple 7 figures. We got this amazing team. We got this, this, this." And so I started to really just outline, current state of our business as it was, call it 6, 9 months ago. And I remember a very short line that he said to me, which was, "Well, what if you could do it differently?" And I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" So he outlines, what if this and what if that? And we're all talking about these different realities of what it could be in business. You could have a very small team. You could have very low cost. You could do marketing this way. And I'm starting to have this awareness of, whoa, 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 whoa. What I've known as my reality doesn't have to be this hard. What I've known as my reality doesn't have to be this many hours. What I've known as my reality doesn't have to be this expensive. I didn't even know that I had a problem. So it was only in that moment, hearing people talk about the other ways that business could look. And I know this sounds really simple because you're thinking, duh, Kate, there's other ways of doing business. But when you're so invested in the way that you've always done things, which I was because it had been very successful for me, I genuinely had blocked out and put blinders on there being another way of doing business. And so once having someone provide another perspective on business, which is why I am such a big advocate of masterminding and events and all of these things, once I had someone share another insight on how business could be done, it literally broke my brain because it made me realize, whoa, I've got a problem here. I didn't have any symptoms of problems that I at the time was aware of, but what I realized was I did feel pressure around more cost for more money. I did feel pressure around the hours I was working. I did feel pressure around some of the things that I was doing. And here comes this individual into my life who completely surprises me with just this new, fresh perspective. And in that moment, I became consciously incompetent and I moved into contemplation. And I started to realize that I became aware that I actually maybe wasn't doing business the way that I entirely wanted to do business long term. And I, in that moment, started to consider maybe there's another way of doing things. Maybe I need to open my brain to another perspective or another approach and see another way of going about scaling my business. And the thing that I think is really important to hit on with this stage is the fact that I would have stayed in stage 1 had I not had an outside perspective indirectly beat me over the head with a opportunity of a different reality. And I think this is important because, when I talk about coaching or anyone tells you about coaching, it can be really easy to be like, oh, this person's selling me something. And listen, I'm right there with you. I see people are like, you need an outside perspective. And I see that marketing just as much as you do. But, my perspective on it has really greatly changed because I realized that if I hadn't gone to that event and had a different, more successful, more advanced coach bring a different reality and perspective to what my current reality was in my business, I'd be in the same reality that I was last year. I would still be doing the same things as I've always done because I didn't even know I had a problem. And this is why it's important for us to have opportunities for an outside set of eyes to look at what's always been normal for us. Because just because something has been normal for you for a long time, whether in your business, your relationship, with your health, it doesn't necessarily actually mean that that's how it has to be. It doesn't mean that that's necessarily normal. And so this moment changed everything because it was like someone turned the lights on and I now was just nonstop rumination. Like I was just, okay, now I see all of the pathways of what my business could look like. And it felt like in that moment, I just got overloaded with possibility, but also overloaded with anxiety. And I'm going to be honest, in that moment, I broke down into tears. And we joke about it now because I remember him being like, "Hey, can I give you a hug?" And I'm like, "No, don't touch me." Because I was like, I'm having a moment right now. I'm having a moment, having a meltdown. Because to be honest, the tears were connected to the fact that I was in the stage of being unconscious about what my issues were, not aware of what my issues were for a long time. A long time. And I had always known that reality. And so the tears for me were actually not connected to anything other than me in that moment realizing that I really, in certain aspects, had suffered emotionally, mentally, financially in some of the things that I had done because I genuinely didn't know. I didn't know. And I didn't have the awareness that I could do it any other way. So when someone came in as this like shining angel of light of a new way of doing business, I got so sad because I'm like, this is exciting. Yes, 2% of me is excited, but the other side was so sad for myself that I had stayed in something that could have been easier and it could have been more flow and it could have been more fun and it could have been, you know, different in a really positive way, but I just didn't know. And I want to invite you to maybe give yourself a permission slip on something because I've realized there's been multiple buckets in my life where I was unconsciously incompetent. I was unconsciously, again, not consciously aware that I had a problem. I wasn't ready to look at it, to be honest. That's what it was. There was situations in my business, there was situations in a lot of buckets in my life. I wasn't at a place mentally where I was ready to look at it. And so what did I do? I just didn't acknowledge it. It wasn't something that I was going to put into my conscious brain. And so, where can you give yourself a permission slip on something that you haven't maybe been wanting to see, you haven't been wanting to acknowledge? Maybe you want to take this as an opportunity to say, where have there been people like this situation for me, or maybe people in your surrounding who have been giving you advice and have been giving you, specific comments and questions and you might find every time they do, you kinda get a little triggered. You get a little bit of a response inside that happens in those moments. And I want you to just take a second to say, "Okay, is there a sliver of that that might be true? Is there a sliver of what someone's saying to me that might be landing because it actually is something I need to change?" And if something is hitting for you, it doesn't mean because you become aware of it, you gotta like that, you gotta change it. that was just the first step. It was just first. I know everyone says like awareness is the first step of change, but it's true. It's true. And in that being true, just because you became aware of it doesn't mean you have to do something about it right now. And I want to give you that reminder because I remember in that moment, I said, how? First of all, how did I go blind to this possibility for so long? And how? How am I going to do business a different way when I've always done it this way? Like I remember it was like literally like I had a out of body experience in that moment. It was wild. And I remember just saying, how am I going to change? How am I going to change? And in that moment, I didn't need a plan. I wanted a plan because it felt so overwhelming to consider a different reality, but I just needed to allow myself to sit first in the awareness of the fact, okay, great. Well, now we have an awareness. We have a conscious ability to see that there's something that's not working. And that's the first step. And as annoying that as that may be in personal development, it's true. Okay. So now we go from a place, again, just to quickly summarize, stage one, we're at pre-contemplation. We're not even consciously aware we got an issue. We are just living blind, not even looking at any of it, not consciously aware of any of it. Stage two, we get into contemplation, which is where we become aware, consciously aware that we've got a problem. Okay. So we're aware that we've got a problem and we're aware that we may not be handling something well or we may not be doing something well, which leads me to stage three, which is preparation or better known as conscious competence. So in preparation, we decide that we're going to make a change and we actively work to do so. And so we will often take steps to gather information. We'll take steps to gather resources. We'll take steps to kind of investigate and research what change would be, and maybe even take a baby step or two toward that change. This is where, in this time, we also become consciously competent, meaning that in this time, we are also looking to gain new knowledge and new skill sets that will help us to create the change that we're looking for. This for me showed up in kind of two different ways. So, in that moment, as I said, we were having this conversation. I realized there's a different way of doing business and it broke my brain. And that was a late night conversation, by the way. That happened at like 11 o'clock at night, bunch of entrepreneurs sitting around a table and talking. And so, when I went back to my room, I pulled out my laptop and obviously, this conversation had initially been sparked at this table by George. George Bryant, you guys have seen him on the podcast before, and you've heard my Montana Insights episode, has had amazing impact on me and my business in the coaching lens and in all lenses, to be honest. But the thing that I really took in that moment was that I wanted to kind of look at, okay, well, there's obviously the possibility of change here, but what would that look like? So what did I do? I went and I researched him from top to bottom. I went through his YouTube. I went through his LinkedIn, his Facebook, his TikTok, his Instagram, his email. Like I think I probably stalked for information gathering purposes to see, okay, like if he's saying this is possible, and all these other people are telling me that there's a totally different way of doing business. I want to know and I want to gather information and get educated on what the heck that looks like and how we're going to do it. I remember going back to my room that night in the hotel and I pulled out my laptop and I just started scouring the internet. And I did this for hours and I started to go through, if it could look like this and could it look like that. And I started to kind of just really like, you know, ruminate on what all of this could look like. And so after doing that research, I remember I woke up the next morning and I had found him in the conference center because he was speaking at that event, as was I. And I said to him, hey, I'm ready for the change. And I remember in that moment, it felt so scary because I, again, had always done business one way. So I didn't know that there was another way of doing things. But I was so deeply desiring change, but genuinely wasn't super crystal clear of what it would look like. And so I had said to him, I want to do an intensive. So he does like multi-day or week-long intensives with clients that are in person. You go to Montana, you deep dive into your business. It's amazing. So if you guys are kind of wanting like an immersive experience, highly recommend. And so I had said to him, I want to come to Montana and I want to do this intensive. And so I kind of in that moment had committed, I had to do something with the feeling. And in this moment of, again, like having an awareness now that I needed to develop a new skill or knowledge, I acknowledged that, I had no idea I needed to change. Then I had this aha moment late night talking to entrepreneurs that I wanted to change something. And then I said, listen, Kate, if you're going to change something, and I believe this to be true for myself, and I tell clients and I tell you this all the time, if you want to change something in any area of your life, you have to change your beliefs. You have to change your perspective. You have to change the way that you look at things. And only once you do that will you see your reality change. And so many people go to the tactics and they go to the steps and they go to, all the strategies. But truthfully, what I knew in that moment after we had that conversation about all these businesses and doing it a different way is that I needed to have someone show me the way. Like if I was really going to create a change, I have this awareness and I got to freaking do something about it because otherwise I'm going to end up relapsing back into the old way that I used to do business. And I don't want to do that. So I in that night within 24 hours, and like, yes, if you guys have listened to our buyers episode of buyer behavior, hello, I'm a driver buyer, which basically means that I know that when I want something, I'm going to do it and boom, it's happening. And so I just decided. I saw him the next day in the conference center. I said, "Hey, I want to do coaching. I don't know what the heck that looks like, but I need this perspective. I need this new approach." And so that's what we did. And I decided to commit to the intensive and follow that with some coaching. And that was my way of actively deciding I was going to change my knowledge around business in the way that I had done things, and I was going to change my skill around it. And something I want to acknowledge at this stage is that this is the seeking of new knowledge and new information, right? This is the stage where we look at ways we can change by adding in new knowledge and new skills. And the thing that I will say is I think too many people look to use the same toolbox and the same skills they've got and try to build something totally different. When the reality is, if what you had in your current toolbox and if what the skills were that you had right now were going to be enough, you would have already done it already. And so what I realized was, okay, I have a great toolbox. I'd built a multiple seven-figure business. It's not like I didn't know how to grow a business. I know how to grow a business. But if I was going to grow it a different way, I was going to need different tools that I frankly, no matter how much I scour to the bottom of my toolbox, I don't have those tools. Or if I do have those tools in my toolbox, I'm not the kind of carpenter or contractor that I need to be to know how to use those to build what I want. And so there's usually two different ways we see the knowledge needing to happen is the fact that you might genuinely need tools in your toolbox right now that you don't have. And you're racking your brain and you're like, I don't know why I'm not changing. Well, maybe you don't have what you need to create what you want. You might need a hammer and you don't have one. So there's the aspect of, do you need more tools, or is it possible that you have tools? You've got a massive toolbox, but you don't have the training and the understanding and the skill set to know how to use those tools to build what you want. And I would hazard to guess most people, at least I feel this way for myself, have a little bit of both. There was parts of my business that when I went into this intensive were dialed in. He's like, "Hey, this looks great. Like these tools are great, but here's how I'd maneuver them, i.e., here's how I would maybe look at them from a fresh perspective to get a different outcome," which came the skill. And there was new things that I had never had experience with before that I added to our toolbox. One of the massive ones that he really leans into with clients is building up customer journeys. And so when we did that with him, that was a tool that I had really not ever played with before. And so then I had to not only understand that tool, but also build the skill of how to use it. So when we're looking to create change, we have to recognize that we might need new knowledge and we might need to develop a new skill. And oftentimes, there's a possibility, of course, that you can do that on your own. But for me, I am very much going to be honest with you. I think a lot of my success has been attributed to my ability to get shortcuts. And what I mean by shortcuts is learning from people who've already done it. Why am I going to struggle to learn how to run a 10K when I could literally learn from someone who's run 10Ks for the last 6 years? Right? So I really try to look to invest in getting knowledge and getting skill sets as fast as I can if I feel like at any moment I have an awareness that I don't have them. And so I'm at this event. I decide, as I said, that I'm ready to change and I want to gather resources, gather skill sets to be able to change and see a different type of business. And so this moves us into the next stage, which is the action stage, better known as where your conscious competence. So again, you're consciously aware that you're starting to build knowledge and skill around something. And you want to get that to a place where you become unconscious competence. Okay. So you go from consciously competent to unconsciously competent. I'm going to break this down and explain this. When I went from doing it on my own to then hiring him, getting his understanding of his knowledge, his skill sets, and starting to apply those, what ultimately happened is that I started to decide to take action in changing my behavior, right? So I was now putting in the reps, putting in the actions of all the things that he had taught me, and I was applying those to my business. And so the thing that we want to be aware of is that the more and more that we take action to the changes that we want to have, the more automatic that becomes in us. So, have you ever gone to do something and you feel like, again, let's go back to our skiing example. Maybe you go to ski the first time and you're terrible and you don't know you're bad, but you're like, okay, I think I'm doing pretty good. And then someone says to you, don't pizza so much. And you're like, okay, so I'm not going to pizza down the hill as much with my skis. So now again, we go into being aware that we're not good. Okay, well, great. Then we're going to seek out training. We might seek out lessons to develop and get a skill set to become better at skiing. But if you are somebody who skis again and again and again and again with that knowledge and you build a skill at a certain level, you don't need to be so consciously focused on being good at it because it becomes natural because of the reps that you put in. And so this is what happened. I did my intensive and I gathered all the knowledge and the skills and understanding of what they were. And then in coaching, in ongoing reps and putting it all into action is where I started to develop into some of those things, becoming unconsciously competent, meaning I didn't have to consciously think about being good at things anymore because they were starting to become second nature. So it was only though that happens through consistent action of doing things and putting in the reps over time. And, there's so many countless examples of this, right? Like any of the top athletes that you would ever consume are people who are not just shooting, a basketball into the net on game day, but they're also someone who's potentially shooting baskets and just doing it over and over and over 500 times, in a week because they're putting in the reps to basically get themselves to a level of mastery where they don't need to be so consciously focused on being good at it anymore because it becomes second nature. And this is why I explain, unconsciously competent is really something that's important for you to understand as a concept because a lot of the times in business, we have this belief that we do something like one time or even 10 times. And after doing it 10 times, we're like, okay, like this just feels really hard. When something feels hard, it often, not always, but oftentimes is a byproduct of the fact that we need to put in more reps. And so it's only once we put in those more reps that we start to be able to get our conscious skill that we're working at. And we're like, okay, maybe it's like, say, again, you're skiing. It's a certain level of pressure that you're thinking about. And it's a certain level of your angles of your skis you're thinking about. And eventually you don't think about any of those things. And in business, the same is true. You will put in so many reps eventually with your marketing. You'll put in so many reps eventually with sales. You'll put in so many reps eventually with being a leader of a team that eventually that will literally become second nature. And it will start to become ingrained in just who you are and how you operate. So the thing I want to add though to this, which is an important kind of caveat to these repetitions of action, is that when you put in those reps, it's important to remember that the reps you're putting in, which is why that knowledge and skill are important, have to be the right reps. Because this is also something I see. Business owners will be like, Kate, I've been doing X, Y, and Z. Like I put in the reps, I'm showing up, I'm posting, I'm selling, I'm doing whatever it is. But because the thing that you're doing is actually not being done well because we lack the knowledge and the skills, you're putting in reps of something that isn't actually necessarily going to get you an outcome. So even though, yes, you're putting in the work, you have to also ensure that the work that you're putting in is something that's rooted from intention around knowledge and developing a skill that's right. So action is and getting really to a place of mastery in anything is about understanding that we need to take consistent action and put in those reps, and that it's those reps over time that help us to achieve mastery in anything. It's once you get to a level where you're doing something and you're so good at it and you don't even have to think about it, that's how you know you've reached a level of being unconsciously competent. You're not having to actively think about being good at something. Okay? Now, from this, we go into what is called maintenance, which is really where, again, we're still in the stage of unconscious competence, but we've moved into maintenance, which is really where we are looking to maintain our new behaviors and, frankly, avoid relapse. And the thing I will say with maintenance is that for the last 6 months, have had to really focus on the things that I learned. So, for example, one of the big takeaways from my intensive, there was so many. And if you want to listen to all of the nuggets of that intensive as I'm telling this story of how that intensive came to be, if you want to listen to that and all those nuggets, we have a Montana Insights part 1 and part 2 episode because there were so many that if you scroll back you can also find. But in that, one of those was really understanding emotional regulation and understanding in a moment where I'm having stress about the business or if I'm having stress about a decision, how to emotionally regulate. So I have to be really conscious to maintain practices of how I regulate emotion so I don't fall back into patterns of being too reactive, right? I have to always make sure that I'm doing my practices of I have to earn the right to touch my business every day is another one, meaning I don't get to touch my business and go into Slack and emails and any of that until I've done my walk for the day, done my morning routine for the day. Like I have these bumper lanes built in to help me to maintain the knowledge and the skills that I have developed. And maintenance is important because many times when we don't actively build out those bumper lanes for change, you will start to fall back into old patterns, right? And what do we know? We know that in times of stress and in times of difficulty and in times of resistance, the number one thing that you're going to fall back on is your habits, which is why these are so important. Because if you don't set those bumper lanes, you have a lot of ability to just fall back into old ways. So, you in this phase of, not really needing to think about being good at it are still though going to need to have a way in which you face challenges. Because in maintenance, just because you're somebody who, has learned a lot about a, certain skill, or if you've learned a lot about something, doesn't mean that because you've crushed it many times over, you're not going to experience a challenge in it. I feel so insanely confident in my business and my team and the amazing women that make everything happen and what we're doing and what we're building. I feel so confident in that. But it doesn't mean that I don't have times or seasons that test me. Of course they do. And so the thing that's important is we have to start to create what we've learned and the knowledge and the skills into an identity, because what it means is that we will fall back onto those in the times of resistance. And resistance is going to happen and challenges are going to happen. And so the same thing is true when it comes to, let's just say, another example of, say, weight loss or fitness. You're going to be tested and you're going to have trying times when you're somebody who's lost a lot of weight and now you're at a place where you feel like, okay, like I'm in routine. It doesn't mean you're not going to go to a event or you're not going to go over the holidays and find that you maybe sometimes fall off, right? Like these things happen. And because they happen, the other thing that we want to recognize is there's a last stage here, which is relapse. And the last stage of relapse is really super common, right? In change. Like many of us have things that we've done or that we've experienced, and we've gone back to really starting at the beginning again, right? And this really ultimately brings us back to the lower levels of the competence. When we relapse, we go back to the fact that we didn't even know oftentimes that we were falling back into those patterns. Or you might fall into the bucket of when you relapse on something, or you relapse on a way you used to do business, you relapse on a way that you used to eat, or you relapse on a way that you used to live your life, whatever bucket it falls into. Maybe you relapse and you go back to a partner or a relationship that's not good for you. Whatever it is, when we do that, there's one of two things that happens. We don't even kind of realize we've faded back into old patterns, which means, again, we're unconsciously incompetent. We don't even realize, we're not even aware that we've done it. But often we also see people in relapse of anything in this stage of the change where when you relapse, you fall actually into the bucket where you become consciously incompetent, meaning you go back to a place where you're actually aware that it's not good. And I'm not going to say this as though I've never done this. I remember, there's different buckets of my life where, I've had, to be honest with you, I've had moments where there were relationships that I was in that maybe the people in my circle didn't think were very supportive for me. And I went back to those. And when I kind of went back to those relationships, it meant that I, for myself, was back into the consciously incompetent bucket, meaning when I went back, the first time when I was in it, I wasn't consciously aware that it maybe wasn't good. But going back, meaning you've made the change and then you've gone back to something, I had an awareness. Like I knew. I had an awareness that this wasn't something that was serving me. I had an awareness of the problem. And I still went back to the situation, but I had an awareness that I had a problem. So I kind of had to go back through the cycles yet again. And I want to normalize the relapse stage because change is it's so hard. It's so hard. It's so hard because when you're trying to change who you are, or you're trying to change the way you've always done things, or you're trying to change your business, you got to give yourself some grace. You got to give yourself some grace in, it's not going to be like step 1, step 2, step 3, boop, 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 we're done. Like that's just, would we love it all to be that way? Yeah, for sure. Have I tried to, lose the same 20 pounds like 5 times? Yup. Right? Like I've relapsed. I've had times where I was like really good on working out and super healthy, and then I let my health go. And I'm, again, even in this journey now, trying to get back on the health train. Have I, gone through and maybe had relationships or friendships that weren't really serving me? And I maybe took space from that person, or I got distance from them, and then I end up going back and, going into that relationship? Yeah. Yeah. Have I had practices in business where I was like, okay, like I'm not going to work past this time, and I'm not going to work on the weekends. I'm not going to do this. And then I go back to that? Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's important that we recognize relapse just as much as any other stage. Because the thing that we know is that this is not something that it's like a linear process. You might go through these a couple times before you really make long-term sustainable change, right? So, with the stages of change, it's not something that is a one and done. So, it's important for us to acknowledge that because again, when we get into these places of we want to change something in our life and we decide that we're ready to see our life look different, to see our business look different, it's important for us to acknowledge that this might be something you do a couple times over. And yes, of course, are there ways and there's tools and things around that. But as I said, I think, in my opinion, stage has so much to do with the perspective that you're in, the level of readiness that you have. Because for me, I think the things that I've always done to create change have often not stuck because of my perspective and my readiness when I was going into them. Like, truthfully, every time I talk about this, the tears come. Truthfully, I think there were areas in my life that I had an awareness that I needed to change, and I just wasn't ready. Like, I wasn't ready to put in the work, and I wasn't maybe ready to have the hard conversation, and I wasn't ready to have the different reality that I knew was gonna come after doing and making those changes, right? And I wanna also use this as an invitation for you to ask yourself where that might be happening. Where are things that you have an awareness of that you are deciding to not look at right now? And maybe is there something in your life right now that you know you need to change that you're not? And ask yourself, why are you not? Why are you not making that change? Why are you not taking a step to get new knowledge? Why are you not deciding to, put in a new type of habit or ongoing lifestyle change? And is it because you fear what the outcome could be? Is it because you fear it might work out amazing? Is it because you fear that it might work out horribly and you catastrophize, as have I, of all the things that could happen? I remember vividly, contemplating, the ending of my last relationship. And I remember saying, what if I end up single and alone forever? Like, what if no one wants me? What if I'm like damaged goods because I'm just, you know, had what I felt was a massive failure. And it kept me from wanting to make that change. It kept me from wanting to make decisions. And even with my health, the reason I really attribute the constant cycle of coming back to the same thing over and over. And it does feel different this time for me because I've been really putting a very different type of energy around it. And I realized that honestly, I wasn't ready to do the work, and my perspective around the work was different before. I used to see changing my health as like, I hate my body, I have to change it. And now I see I love my body so much, and I'm excited for who I get to create myself to be. I'm excited for stepping into being more fit and being more strong, and I'm excited to be an amazing role model for kids one day of what it means to be able to take care of your health. Like, I'm approaching it from such a different way, and because of that, it's changing the way that I'm experiencing wanting to make the change. And so, I wanted to cover the stages of change as well as the levels of competence today because I wanna normalize what change looks like, number 1. I wanna normalize the different stages all of us go through, sometimes multiple times over. And I also want to give you today as an opportunity to realize that the change that you wanna see in your life is within your power. You can decide listening today. Enough. Enough is enough. You can be me that day at the conference and have this aha moment, whether it's this podcast that's creating that for you, if it's somebody else's message or conversation you had recently, if it's that talk you had with your mom or your friend or your dad that recently kind of hit for you and you've been sitting with something. Like, let there be a moment where you decide, you know what? Enough is enough. Like, this is the time that I'm going to change the thing that I've said that I've always wanted to do or that I've always talked about doing. Or use this as an opportunity to really look at things that you've been actively not really wanting to see. And that's what it was for me. There was a lot of things that I didn't really feel ready to see. I didn't feel ready to acknowledge. I didn't feel ready to change. And I had that light bulb moment, and it was immediately, I am not even lying to you, less than 24 hours later, I was like, "How do I get this knowledge and skills? Like, I need this knowledge and skills." Because when I get that information, that gives me the key to change. And so ask yourself right now, what is a change you wanna make in your life? What is a change maybe you wanna make in your business? What's that one thing that you're like, "This is the thing that I want to change?" And then ask yourself, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? And like, can we just make 2025 please the year that we don't do this again? We're not the girl who's going to have this goal next year because we crushed it in 2025. I'm not going to say, "Oh, I'm going to get healthy again." I'm not going to say, "Oh, I'm going to scale my business again." I'm not going to say, "Oh, I deserve a better relationship for XYZ reason again." Like, let us decide in this moment as you listen to this that this is the year in 2025 that you are going to make that change, and the thing that you and I both know you already have the awareness of. As I've talked through things today, the reason I've asked questions along the way is I really want you to ask yourself what came up for you today. What's the change that you're not acknowledging that you really kind of want? Maybe the things that are not working that you really haven't been wanting to see, but you kind of know are there. And with that, can we use this as an invitation to decide that we're going to do things differently this year? And I invite you on that because I am too on that same journey in multiple areas of my life. And I don't say this from my high horse. I'm in that mud with you, girl. I am in that mud with you. But what I can tell you is, God, it feels so liberating to just know that we're doing it differently. Like, it's so it's so liberating to choose yourself and to choose that you're going to do things differently. It's so liberating to know this is the last time. This is the last time. This could be the last time that you change this. This could be the last time you ever have it as a goal because you'll do it and then it will be something else. And you'll develop and you'll go into this next dream, this next vision that you have. And, as we conclude today, I want to say I'm excited for you. I'm excited for all you're going to change. I'm excited to see what that goal is. I'm excited to see what the light bulb was for you today. And so, as I said, I am in that mud with you, and I don't know what your goal is, but you guys know that I have been doing all of my goals publicly on social media for the year of 2025. And we have a becoming series, which basically is where I am stepping into who I want to become in 2025. And so I want to invite you to join me in this achieving of the things that we're going for. And so if you are listening to this and you're committed to change, shoot me a message. I would love to hear from you. What are you working on? What was your aha moment? What was the thing that maybe you were kind of not wanting to see, but you fully know that you can't unsee now? And I would love to just hear any downloads that you have, any kind of aha moments that came through for you today. I love, genuinely, it fills my bucket to hear from you and talk to you guys every week about the things that land for you, because it really just, I will say, when I record these podcasts, I feel so like just me talking into a tunnel. Like it's just me in my basement over here recording this. And so it means the world to me to be able to hear from you and hear all the downloads that happen for you. So all of that to say, more than anything, I love you to pieces. Thank you so, so much for listening. And I really appreciate you spending this last hour with me. And I'm excited for you and for 2025. And so if you want to join me on our goal together, you can join our Becoming group, which is entirely free. It is women empowering other women as they pursue their goals of relationships, health, mental health, business, every single bucket. And if you also just want to reach out and just chat with me one-on-one, I'd absolutely love to hear from you. So all of that to say, friends, I cannot wait to see you in next week's episode. And as always, stay ambitious.